I spent almost a year talking to a guy online before I finally met him in real life. And honestly, by the time it actually happened, I was more nervous than I'd ever been in my life. Because Greg wasn't just some random guy from an app anymore. He was the first person I talked to every morning. The last person I texted before falling asleep. The guy who knew what coffee I drank during stressful workdays, which songs I played when I couldn't sleep, and exactly how to calm me down when my anxiety started spiraling at 2 in the morning. And the craziest part? For 11 months, I had no idea if the chemistry between us would survive real life. It started stupidly. I was lying in bed one night doom scrolling through Reddit after another awful date. You know the kind: forced conversation, fake smiles, pretending to care while mentally planning your escape route. I got home irritated, tossed my keys onto the counter, and opened this thread about long-distance relationships. Most of the comments were cynical as hell. Never works. You're falling for a fantasy. People lie online. Then there was one comment buried in the middle that just said, "The right person will start feeling real long before you touch them." I don't know why that stuck with me, but it did. I clicked the profile. That was Greg. No photo. Just a dumb username and sarcastic comments under gaming threads, relationship posts, movie discussions. Somehow we kept ending up in the same places online. A few days later I replied to one of his comments as a joke. Then he messaged me. At first it was casual. Memes. Late night complaining. Making fun of terrible reality TV. I didn't even know what he looked like for the first week. Which somehow made it more intense. Because without photos or flirting right away, I got attached to his personality first. And Greg had this way of talking that felt ridiculously easy. Like we'd already known each other forever. He was funny without trying too hard. Dry humor. Kind of self-assured sometimes. But underneath that, there was something softer he tried to hide. I noticed it early. Like the way he always checked if I got home safe after work. Or remembered random details I forgot mentioning. Or how he'd disappear for an hour and come back apologizing because he'd fallen asleep after a double shift. Eventually we moved from Reddit messages to texting. Then voice notes. Then calls. The first time I heard his voice, I literally sat upright in bed. Deep. Calm. Slight southern accent. "Bradley?" he said. "You still there?" "Yeah," I answered too fast. He laughed softly. "You sound disappointed." "No, you just don't sound how I expected." "Oh? Thought I'd sound uglier?" I laughed so hard I almost dropped my phone. After that, things escalated quickly. Emotionally. That's what got dangerous. We started talking every single day. Morning commutes. Lunch breaks. Late nights. Sometimes we'd fall asleep on call together without meaning to. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. hearing faint breathing through my headphones and realize he was still there. And somehow that became my favorite feeling in the world. The weird part was that Greg lived almost 1,000 miles away. Different state. Different life. He worked construction management. Long hours. Early mornings. He'd send me photos of muddy boots, sunrise job sites, giant half-finished buildings. Meanwhile, I worked remotely doing marketing design work from my apartment, surviving mostly on caffeine and bad sleep schedules. We were complete opposites. But it worked. Too well. Maybe because there was no pressure at first. No expectations. Just two guys slowly becoming addicted to each other. About 3 months in, he finally sent me a picture. I remember staring at my phone for a full minute afterward. Dark hair. Broad shoulders. Scruffy beard. Gray hoodie. One hand holding a coffee cup while standing outside in cold weather. And the smile. Jesus Christ. Not even model hot in an intimidating way. Worse. Comfortable hot. The kind of guy you instantly imagine kissing in a kitchen at midnight. My heart absolutely betrayed me. "You alive over there?" he texted. I typed 3 different responses before settling on. "You're annoyingly attractive." His reply came instantly. Took you long enough to notice. Smug jerk. After that, FaceTime started happening. And that changed everything. Because now I could see the expressions. The pauses. The way his eyes softened when he looked at me. Sometimes we'd just exist together silently. I'd work on my laptop while he cooked dinner. Or he'd sit on his couch gaming while I cleaned my apartment. Domestic stuff. Fake relationship stuff. Except it stopped feeling fake pretty quickly. One night around month 6, I was half asleep during a call when Greg suddenly said, "I think about you all the time." I opened my eyes immediately. Neither of us talked for a second. Then I quietly asked, "Yeah?" He nodded slowly on screen. "You've gotten really important to me, Bradley." The way he said my name completely ruined me. Not dramatic. Not overly emotional. Just honest. I remember my chest hurting a little. Because I felt it too. And that was terrifying. Long-distance feelings are dangerous because your brain fills in the blanks. You start idealizing someone. Imagining perfection where reality probably wouldn't survive. I knew that. Still didn't stop myself from falling. Around month 8, people in my life started noticing something was different. "You smile at your phone like an idiot," my friend Marcus told me during drinks one night. "I do not." "You absolutely do." I rolled my eyes, but he was right. Greg had become part of my routine in a way I didn't know how to explain to anyone else. He made bad days manageable. He made lonely nights quieter. And somehow, despite never touching him, I missed him physically all the time. That part messed with my head the most. Especially late at night. Especially during those long FaceTime calls where he'd lie shirtless in bed looking exhausted after work while talking softly to me like I was already his. The tension between us started building slowly after that. Little comments. Long silences. The kind where both people are thinking the exact same thing but neither wants to say it first. Then one night it finally snapped. I was lying on my couch in sweatpants, half watching a movie while Greg talked about some disaster at work. "And then the guy backed the forklift directly into the gate," he said, rubbing his forehead. I laughed. "You attract chaos." "Maybe." He looked tired. Really tired. His hoodie sleeves were pushed up his forearms, and I caught myself staring at his hands. Greg noticed. A slow grin spread across his face. "What?" he asked quietly. "Nothing. Bradley." I looked away from the screen immediately, which only made him laugh harder. "Oh my God!" he said. "You were checking me out. I hate you." "No, you don't." The silence after that felt heavy. Charged. Then Greg leaned slightly closer to the camera. "You know what's hard?" he asked softly. I swallowed. "What?" "The fact I still don't know what it's like being close to you." Warmth spread through my entire body. I tried to joke my way out of it. "That was smooth." "I wasn't trying to be smooth." And suddenly he looked nervous. Actually nervous. "I'm serious," he admitted. "I think about it constantly." I couldn't breathe right for a second. Because I thought about it too. His hands. His chest. His voice close to my ear instead of through speakers. What it would feel like if he kissed me. The worst part? I could tell he wanted to say more. But neither of us moved. Neither of us knew what crossing that line would mean. Because once this became real, there was no pretending anymore. And deep down, I think both of us already knew we were heading towards something neither of us would be able to walk away from. After that conversation, things between Greg and me changed completely. Not officially. Neither of us sat down and said we're dating now. But emotionally? We were already there. The flirting got worse after that night. Way worse. He'd text me things during work like, "You looked good yesterday." Or, "Can't stop thinking about your voice." And somehow the smallest comments hit the hardest. Not because they were dirty. Because they felt real. I started noticing how attached I'd become when little things affected my mood. If Greg took too long replying, I felt weirdly restless. If he sounded stressed during calls, It ruined my evening. That should have scared me more than it did. Instead, I leaned into it. One Friday night we stayed on FaceTime until almost 4 in the morning. Greg had a beer in his hand, hoodie half unzipped, looking relaxed for once. "You know what's funny?" he said. "What? If we lived in the same city, this probably would have happened already." I raised an eyebrow. "What would have happened?" He looked straight at me. "You know." My stomach flipped immediately. The tension between us had become impossible to ignore by then. Every conversation felt loaded now. Every silence stretched too long. I laughed nervously. "You're very confident." "No," he said quietly. "I just know how I feel about you." That shut me up fast. Greg wasn't dramatic with emotions. That's what made moments like this hit so hard. When he said something honest, you knew he meant it completely. He rubbed his jaw slowly before continuing. "Honestly, Bradley, I don't think I've connected with somebody like this before." I stared at him through the screen, suddenly unable to think straight. "Yeah," I admitted softly. "Me either." For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Greg smiled a little. "You know what's frustrating?" "What now?" "I can't even be close to you after saying that." My entire face got hot. I looked away immediately, laughing under my breath. "You're actually evil. You like it." Unfortunately, he was right. A few weeks later, things got harder in a different way. Greg started pulling back slightly. Not completely, but enough for me to notice. His texts got shorter some days. Calls ended earlier. He seemed distracted more often, exhausted from work, quieter than usual. At first I told myself I was overthinking. Then one night he canceled our call entirely. That had never happened before. I sat on my couch staring at our messages, feeling this stupid pit in my stomach. It shouldn't have mattered that much. But it did. Around midnight he finally texted. "Sorry. Rough day." I stared at the message longer than I should have before replying. "Everything okay?" 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, honestly, I think I'm freaking myself out a little. That got my attention immediately. I called him before I could overthink it. Greg answered after 2 rings. For a few seconds either of us spoke. Then he sighed quietly. "I didn't mean to make you worry." "You did anyway." Another pause. Then he finally admitted it. "This is getting really real for me." The honesty in his voice hit hard. I leaned back against my couch cushions. "That's a bad thing?" "No," he said immediately. "That's the problem." I stayed quiet. Greg rarely sounded vulnerable, but tonight he did. "I keep thinking about meeting you," he admitted. "And then I start wondering what happens after." My chest tightened. Because I thought about that too. All the time. "What if it's weird in person?" he continued quietly. "What if we built this whole thing up too much?" I swallowed hard. The truth was, I'd had those exact fears for months. Because online chemistry is one thing. Real life is different. What if we met and the spark disappeared instantly? What if the comfort vanished? What if he hugged me and it felt wrong? But underneath all those fears was a bigger one I hadn't admitted yet. What if it felt too right? I rubbed my forehead slowly. "You want to know something embarrassing?" I asked. "What?" "I've imagined meeting you like 100 times." Greg laughed softly. "Only 100? Shut up." "No, seriously," he said, voice gentler now. "Tell me." I hesitated. Then finally admitted it. "I always picture seeing you at the airport and immediately knowing." "Knowing what?" "That it's real." Silence. Not awkward silence. Heavy silence. Then Greg said quietly, "Yeah. Just that." But the way he said it nearly destroyed me. A month later, we finally stopped dancing around the topic. It happened randomly. I was grocery shopping while talking to him through earbuds when he suddenly asked, "When are we doing this?" I stopped beside the cereal aisle. "Doing what?" Meeting. My heart started pounding instantly. Greg sounded calm, but I could hear tension underneath it. I don't know, I admitted. Well, I do. That made me smile immediately. Oh, you planned this already? Obviously. Control freak. You like that too? Again, unfortunately true. I grabbed random groceries while he explained his idea. There was a long holiday weekend coming up in 2 months. He wanted to fly out. To see me? Actually see me. My apartment suddenly felt too small just imagining it. You're serious? I asked quietly. Completely. I leaned against my kitchen counter after getting home, pulse racing. And then the panic hit. Because suddenly this wasn't fantasy anymore. This was happening. I'd built this version of Greg in my head over an entire year. Now real life was about to either confirm everything or ruin it. You got quiet, he noticed. I'm nervous. Me too. That surprised me. You are? Bradley, he said, laughing softly. I'm flying across the country to meet the guy I accidentally fell for online. Of course I'm nervous. The words fell for echoed in my head. Neither of us acknowledged them directly. But we both heard it. After that, everything started feeling more intense. We counted down the weeks without meaning to. Our calls got longer again. More personal. More intimate. One night Greg fell asleep during FaceTime with his phone propped against his pillow. I remember lying there watching him breathe for a stupid amount of time. It felt insane. I was completely gone for this man. Then came the night that really changed everything. It was exactly 12 days before his flight. We were talking late again, both exhausted, either wanting to hang up. Greg looked especially good that night, which was honestly annoying. Dark t-shirt. Messy hair. Scruff along his jaw. He was lying sideways in bed looking at me with this soft expression that always ruined my ability to think normally. You know what I realized? He murmured. What? The first thing I'm gonna want to do when I see you. I tried to play it cool. Probably insult me. Nah. He shook his head slowly. I'm gonna kiss you. My breath caught immediately. The way he said it wasn't teasing. It wasn't flirty. It sounded certain. And suddenly I could picture it too clearly. Seeing him in person. Him walking toward me. His hands on me for the first time. I looked away from the screen because my face was burning. Greg smiled slightly when he noticed. You okay over there? No, I admitted honestly. He laughed quietly. Then his expression softened again. Bradley? Yeah? I really hope you're real. That hit harder than anything else he'd ever said. Because underneath all the flirting and tension and late-night conversations, that was the truth neither of us could escape. We were two people in love with voices, screens, and carefully framed moments. And in less than 2 weeks, we were about to find out if any of it could survive reality. The morning Greg's flight landed, I changed shirts 4 times. That's not an exaggeration. 4. Nothing looked right. Too casual. Too desperate. Too obvious that I'd spent an hour trying to look effortless. By the time I finally left for the airport, my stomach was in complete chaos. I kept telling myself to calm down. It was just Greg. The same guy I talked to every day. The same voice I fell asleep listening to half the week. But somehow that made it worse. Because if this went badly, I wasn't just losing a crush. I was losing my person. Traffic felt endless. Every red light pissed me off. By the time I parked and walked into arrivals, my heart was pounding so hard I could barely think straight. And then came the waiting. That was the worst part. Standing there pretending to casually check my phone while internally losing my mind. I remember texting him. You alive? His reply came immediately. Just landed. That single message nearly killed me. Suddenly this was real. Not FaceTime. Not texts. Not imagination. Real. I stood there surrounded by families and couples and exhausted travelers while trying not to panic. Then people started coming through the gate. business travelers, parents with kids, college students dragging suitcases. Every tall, dark-haired guy made my chest jump. And then I saw him. Greg. Black hoodie. Backpack slung over one shoulder. Looking around the terminal with this slightly tense expression I'd never seen before. For a second I genuinely forgot how to breathe. Because no screen had prepared me properly for how he looked in real life. He was broader than I expected. Taller too. And somehow more intimidating in person, but softer at the same time. Human. Real. His eyes found mine across the crowd. And everything else disappeared. I swear to God the entire airport blurred for a second. Greg stopped walking. Then he smiled. Not the self-assured grin from FaceTime. Something smaller. Nervous. Relieved. And suddenly I realized he was just as scared as I was. I started walking toward him before my brain fully caught up. So did he. Then we were standing there face to face for the first time after almost a year of talking every single day. Neither of us spoke immediately. Greg looked at me like he was trying to process that I actually existed. "You're real," he said quietly. My chest tightened instantly. I laughed nervously. "Apparently." Then he shook his head slowly, eyes still locked on mine. "No, seriously." The way he looked at me in that moment completely wrecked me. Not lust. Not awkward curiosity. Recognition. Like seeing someone familiar after a very long time apart. And before I could overthink anything, Greg stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. Jesus Christ. I wasn't prepared for that either. His arms wrapped around me firmly, warm and solid and real in a way my brain couldn't process fast enough. I hugged him back automatically. And the craziest part? The second he touched me, all the fear disappeared. Not all the nerves. But the doubt. That horrible fear that things would feel awkward or forced instantly vanished. Because standing there against him felt natural. Too natural. Greg pulled back slowly, hands still resting briefly on my arms. His eyes flicked over my face like he still couldn't believe this was happening. "You're taller than I thought," he said. "You're more annoying than I thought." He laughed softly. God, hearing that laugh in person did something dangerous to me. For the first 20 minutes we were both weirdly shy. Which made no sense considering we already knew everything about each other. But seeing him physically react in real time changed things. The way his mouth twitched before smiling. How his voice sounded deeper standing close to me. The way he kept glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Every tiny thing became overwhelming. On the drive back to my apartment, we talked nonstop from pure nervous energy. "You drive like a grandma," Greg informed me. "I drive safely." "You merged at approximately 4 miles an hour." "You survived." "Barely." I laughed harder than the joke deserved, mostly because hearing him in the passenger seat felt surreal. At one point I caught him looking at me while I drove. "What?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "Just weird finally being here." "Good weird?" Greg smiled. "Very good weird." That sentence stayed in my head the entire drive. When we got to my apartment, the tension shifted again. Because now it was private. No airport crowds. No distractions. Just us. I suddenly became hyper-aware of everything. The fact he'd be sleeping here. The fact we were alone. The fact that after a year of wanting him, he was standing inside my apartment looking around while taking off his hoodie. I nearly lost my mind right there. "You nervous?" he asked suddenly. I laughed once. "Extremely." "Good." I looked at him. "Good? Means I'm not the only one." There was that soft, nervous honesty again. Greg set his bag down by the couch before turning toward me fully. For a second, neither of us moved. The air felt heavy. Charged. Then he stepped closer. Slowly this time. Close enough that I could feel warmth radiating off him. My pulse immediately went insane. Greg looked directly into my eyes like he was checking for hesitation. "You remember what I told you?" he asked quietly. I swallowed hard. "About what?" The first thing I wanted to do when I saw you. My entire body went tense. Because I remembered. Very clearly. I remember, I admitted. His gaze dropped briefly to my mouth before lifting again. Can I? That almost destroyed me. Not because of the question itself. Because after all the tension and build-up and waiting, he still asked gently. Carefully. Like I mattered. I nodded before I could overthink it. And Greg kissed me. Soft at first. Tentative. The kind of kiss that feels like both people are still trying to convince themselves this is actually happening. Then suddenly it wasn't tentative anymore. One of his hands slid against my waist, pulling me closer, and every thought disappeared from my brain immediately. His mouth felt warm and familiar in a way that made no logical sense. Like my body recognized him before my mind did. I kissed him back harder without meaning to. Greg made this low sound against my mouth that nearly ruined me on the spot. When we finally pulled apart, both of us looked slightly stunned. He rested his forehead briefly against mine and laughed softly under his breath. Well, he murmured. I could barely think straight. Yeah. That was even worse than I expected. I blinked. Worse? Greg looked at me with a dangerous little smile. Now I'm definitely not gonna wanna leave. And honestly, neither was I. That first kiss completely changed the atmosphere between us. Before that, there'd still been this thin layer of uncertainty underneath everything. Like maybe we were both still waiting for reality to catch up and ruin the fantasy. But after Greg kissed me? No chance. The chemistry was real. Painfully real. And honestly, that almost made things harder. Because now every small touch felt loaded. Every glance lingered too long. Every moment alone together felt like standing too close to a fire. Greg helped me unpack groceries later like he'd already lived there for months. It should have felt awkward having someone from the internet suddenly standing in my kitchen opening cabinets and teasing me about my terrible snack choices. Instead, it felt weirdly domestic. Comfortable. Dangerously comfortable. You actually eat these? Greg asked, holding up instant ramen with genuine disappointment. Don't judge me. I'm absolutely judging you. You flew across the country for me. Your standards clearly aren't that high. Greg looked over at me immediately, smiling slowly. No, he said quietly. My standards are exactly why I'm here. That shut me up fast. He had this way of saying simple things that somehow landed directly in my chest. Later that night we ended up sitting on my couch watching a movie either of us paid attention to. Mostly because Greg kept touching me absent-mindedly. Nothing overt. His knee against mine. His arms stretched behind me along the couch cushions. His fingers brushing my wrist while reaching for popcorn. Tiny things. But after almost a year of imagining physical contact with him, every single touch felt intense. At one point I caught him staring again. What? I asked, smiling slightly. Greg shook his head once. I still can't believe you're actually here. You're the one who flew here. Yeah, he murmured. Best decision I ever made. That nervous warmth spread through my chest again. The movie kept playing in the background while the space between us slowly disappeared. Eventually Greg shifted closer. Close enough that our legs pressed together fully now. You know what's funny? He asked quietly. What? I thought this would be awkward. Me too. But it's not. I looked at him. No, I admitted softly. It really isn't. Greg's eyes flicked down to my mouth again. That look was becoming very dangerous for me very quickly. Then he leaned in and kissed me again. Slower this time. More confident. Like he already knew how I'd respond now. My hand instinctively grabbed his hoodie near the collar, pulling him closer without thinking. Greg made another one of those low, quiet sounds against my mouth that completely melted my brain. The kiss deepened naturally after that. Still not rushed. Just hungry. Like both of us had spent too long imagining this already. His hand slid carefully along my side, fingertips pressing lightly through my shirt. I could feel warmth everywhere he touched me. When we finally pulled apart, Both of us looked a little wrecked. Greg laughed softly under his breath. You have no idea how long I've wanted to do that. I tried to respond normally. Failed completely. Yeah? Bradley, he murmured, still close enough that our noses brushed slightly. I've been struggling to behave myself since the airport. That image alone nearly killed me. I leaned back against the couch trying to calm my heartbeat while Greg watched me with obvious amusement. You're blushing, he pointed out. I hate you. No, you don't. Again, unfortunately true. The weird thing was how easy everything felt afterward. We talked for hours that night. Real conversations. Not just flirting. Greg told me more about his family. His complicated relationship with his dad. How long it took him to come out fully. The pressure he always put on himself to seem calm and in control. And I told him things too. Stuff I usually avoided. Past relationships. Anxiety. The fear that people eventually lost interest once they saw the less polished parts of me. Greg listened quietly while I talked. Really listened. Then at one point he reached over and squeezed my hand gently. I don't think you realize how easy you are to care about, he said. That nearly wrecked me more than the kissing did. Nobody had ever said something like that to me so casually before. Not like they truly meant it. Around midnight, exhaustion finally started catching up with us. Greg stretched against the couch, his shirt lifting slightly and exposing a strip of skin above his waistband. My brain immediately stopped functioning. He noticed me looking too. Of course he did. You're staring again, he said quietly. I covered my face with one hand. You make it very difficult not to. Greg laughed softly. Then his expression changed slightly. Less teasing now. More serious. Come here, he murmured. I looked at him carefully before moving closer. Greg's arm wrapped around my waist naturally, pulling me against him until I was basically half lying on top of him on the couch. And God. The closeness nearly overloaded my brain. His chest felt solid beneath me. Warm. Real. I could hear his heartbeat. For a few minutes neither of us spoke. We just stayed there tangled together while the movie credits rolled in the background. Then Greg quietly said, This feels really good. The honesty in his voice hit me immediately. Yeah, I admitted. It does. His fingers moved slowly along my back underneath my shirt, absent-minded and gentle. Affectionate. Which somehow felt even more intimate. I tilted my head up slightly and Greg kissed me again automatically, like he couldn't help himself anymore. At this point I couldn't either. The kiss turned deeper almost immediately. Slower. Hotter. Greg's hand slid up into my hair while mine grabbed his shoulder for balance. Everything about him felt overwhelming in person. His size. His warmth. The way he reacted every time I kissed him harder. Eventually we pulled apart, breathing unevenly. Greg rested his forehead against mine again, eyes half closed. You're dangerous, he murmured. I laughed softly. Me? Yeah. He smiled slightly. You have no idea what you do to me. My stomach flipped hard at that. Then came the moment that suddenly made everything feel very real again. Greg glanced toward the hallway leading to my bedroom. Then back at me. Neither of us spoke. But the tension instantly shifted. Because up until now, there'd still been distractions. Talking. Movies. Jokes. Now it was quiet. Just us. Greg looked strangely nervous again all of a sudden. You tired? He asked carefully. I knew exactly what he was really asking. And honestly, my heart was pounding so hard I thought he could probably feel it through my chest. But underneath the nerves was something stronger. Trust. Because somehow this man who started as a random internet comment had become the safest thing in my life. I looked at him for a second longer before answering quietly. A little. Greg nodded once. Then his hand squeezed my waist gently. Okay, he said softly. Come to bed with me. I don't think I'll ever forget the way my heart felt walking down that hallway behind Greg. Not just nervous. Not just excited. Something deeper. Because this wasn't some random encounter or impulsive night with a stranger. We already knew each other in ways most people never take the time to learn. He knew what my laugh sounded like when it was genuine. He knew how quiet I got when I was overwhelmed. He knew I needed background noise to sleep and that I always forgot to charge my phone before bed. And now he was standing in my bedroom looking around with this soft half-smile like he already belonged there. It hit me hard. Greg tossed his hoodie onto the chair near my desk before turning back toward me. For a second neither of us moved. Then he stepped closer again slowly, like he still couldn't quite believe he was allowed to touch me. His hand settled gently at my waist. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Yeah. You sure?" The concern in his voice melted something in me immediately. I laughed softly. "I'm nervous, but yeah. I'm okay." Greg smiled a little at that. "Good," he murmured. Then he kissed me again. And somehow every kiss with him already felt different. This one wasn't rushed or desperate. It felt careful. Intentional. Like he was learning me. My hands slid up his chest instinctively, and I felt him exhale softly against my mouth when I moved closer. The room suddenly felt very warm. Greg rested his forehead briefly against mine after the kiss broke. "You're even better than I imagined," he admitted quietly. That made my entire face heat up instantly. "You say things like that on purpose." "No," he said softly. "That's the problem." His honesty kept catching me off guard. I kissed him again before I could think too much about it. This time Greg smiled into it slightly, one hand sliding into my hair while the other stayed firm against my waist. I could already tell he liked touching me. Not aggressively. Just constantly. Like he needed reassurance I was actually there. Eventually we ended up sitting against the headboard talking quietly in the dark, either of us seeming ready to sleep yet. The city lights outside filtered softly through the blinds while Greg lay beside me looking unusually relaxed. "I was terrified before this trip," he admitted suddenly. I looked over at him. "Really? Oh yeah? You didn't seem terrified." Greg laughed softly. "That's because I'm good at pretending." That felt painfully honest. He turned onto his side facing me fully now. "I kept thinking maybe we'd meet and something would feel off," he admitted. "Like maybe we only work through screens." "Yeah," I said quietly. "I thought about that too." Greg's eyes stayed on mine. "But then I saw you at the airport," he murmured. "And everything got really simple." My chest tightened hard at that. Because I understood exactly what he meant. No confusion. No uncertainty. Just this overwhelming feeling of there you are. I don't know how long we stayed there talking. Hours maybe. Eventually the conversation faded naturally into quieter moments. Soft touches. Long looks. The kind of silence that only feels comfortable with the right person. At one point Greg brushed his thumb lightly across my jaw while studying my face. "What?" I asked quietly. "You're beautiful." I actually groaned. "That was disgustingly smooth." "I'm serious." That shut me up immediately. Greg smiled slightly at my reaction before leaning over and kissing me softly again. Everything with him kept circling back to that. Touching. Kissing. Smiling against each other's mouths like we couldn't quite stop. At some point I realized my guard had disappeared completely. Usually I overthink everything with people. How I look. What I sound like. Whether I'm too much or not enough. But with Greg, none of that noise seemed as loud anymore. He made me feel wanted in this calm, steady way that got under my skin fast. Eventually he pulled me closer against his chest, wrapping an arm around me naturally like he'd done it 1,000 times before. "You comfortable?" he murmured. "Very. Good." I could feel his heartbeat under my cheek. Strong. Steady. For a while we just stayed like that, quietly tangled together. And honestly, that might have been the moment I realized how completely screwed I was. Because it wasn't just attraction anymore. It wasn't even just love. It was peace. The kind you don't notice you've been missing until someone gives it to you. At some point, Greg tilted my chin up gently so I'd look at him. His expression had softened completely now. You know something? He asked quietly. What? I don't think I was prepared for how hard this would hit me. I smiled slightly. Meeting me was that traumatic? He laughed under his breath. You know what I mean? Yeah. I did. Because I felt it too. The distance had protected us in a weird way. Screens leave room for emotional safety. There's always an exit. Always space. But this? Him holding me in bed while the city lights flickered outside? There was no emotional distance left anymore. And I think that scared both of us a little. Greg looked at me carefully for another second before speaking again. I'm gonna hate leaving. The words hit like a punch to the chest because I'd been avoiding thinking about that part entirely. His trip was only 4 days. 4. Suddenly that felt unbearably short. I tried to joke anyway. You could always fake your own death and stay here. Greg smiled faintly, but it faded quickly. You think I haven't thought about it already? Something about the way he said that made my chest ache. I looked away for a second before quietly asking, what happens after this? Greg went still. Not tense. Just thoughtful. Then he reached over, brushing his fingers slowly through my hair. I don't know, he admitted honestly. But I know I don't want this to end. That answer should have terrified me because it wasn't practical or logical or planned out. But somehow it felt more meaningful exactly because it was honest. No fake promises. No dramatic speeches. Just truth. I moved closer instinctively, and Greg kissed the top of my head softly before pulling me tighter against him. And some time later, tangled together in the dark after nearly a year of waiting to meet each other, we finally fell asleep side by side for the very first time. Waking up beside Greg felt strangely natural. That was the first thought that hit me the next morning. Not awkward. Not surreal anymore. Just right. I opened my eyes slowly to gray morning light spilling through the blinds and immediately became aware of warmth pressed against my back. Greg. His arm was wrapped loosely around my waist, breathing slow and even behind me. For a second I stayed completely still, letting myself absorb the reality of it. After almost a year of hearing his voice through headphones, he was actually here. In my bed. Holding me like he belonged there. And honestly, that scared me a little. Because I already knew this was going to hurt when he left. I shifted slightly, and Greg made this sleepy noise behind me before tightening his arm instinctively. Don't move, he mumbled. I laughed quietly. You're awake? Barely. His voice was rough with sleep, deeper than usual, and it immediately made my brain stop functioning properly. Greg buried his face briefly against the back of my neck before finally opening his eyes. Then he looked at me for a second and smiled softly. There you are. God. Nobody should have been allowed to look at me like that before coffee. You're very affectionate in the morning, I muttered. You're very attractive in the morning. I groaned into my pillow while he laughed quietly behind me. The domesticity of everything after that nearly destroyed me. Making coffee together. Standing too close in my kitchen. Greg brushing against me casually like he'd been doing it forever. At one point I was reaching into a cabinet when he walked up behind me, one hand settling automatically at my waist. I froze immediately. Greg noticed. Sorry, he murmured, though he didn't move away. No, I said quickly. You're fine. His fingers tightened slightly against my hip. And suddenly the air felt very different again. The tension between us had been simmering constantly since he arrived, but now there was less nervousness holding it back. Greg looked down at me carefully. You know, he said quietly, you get this look every time I touch you. What look? Like you're trying very hard to keep functioning. I rolled my eyes even as my face heated up. You're insufferable. And you like me anyway. Again. Unfortunately true. He leaned down and kissed me softly before I could answer. And that kiss turned into another one immediately. then another. Until suddenly I was half trapped between the counter and Greg's chest while he kissed me slow enough to completely melt my brain. One of his hands slid gently along my side underneath my shirt, fingertips warm against my skin. I inhaled sharply without meaning to. Greg paused just enough to look at me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I breathed. That soft, careful expression appeared again. Then he kissed me once more, slower this time, his forehead briefly resting against mine afterward. I don't know what it was about the way Greg touched me, but it never felt rushed. Even when the tension got intense, there was still patience underneath it. Like he wanted me comfortable more than anything else. That got to me fast. Later that afternoon we went walking through the city because staying trapped inside together was becoming increasingly dangerous for my ability to think normally. Greg kept close beside me the entire time, his shoulder brushing mine, his hand occasionally touching my back while guiding me through crowds. Small things. But every touch still sent warmth straight through me. At one point we stopped at a bookstore cafe, and I caught the barista smiling at us while we ordered. Not in a judgmental way. In a "you two are obvious" way. Greg noticed too. When we sat down with our drinks, he smirked slightly. "What?" I asked. "She thought we were together." My stomach flipped immediately. "And?" Greg looked at me over his coffee cup. "I liked it." That answer stayed in my chest the rest of the day. By nighttime, neither of us wanted space anymore. We ended up back on my couch after dinner, legs tangled together while some random show played in the background. Greg was quieter tonight. Not upset. Just thoughtful. I noticed it eventually. "You okay?" I asked softly. He nodded once before looking down at our intertwined legs. "I'm trying not to think about leaving already." There it was. That ache again. I leaned my head back against the couch cushions quietly. "Yeah," I admitted. "Me too." Greg turned toward me fully then, one hand sliding gently along my arm. "I wish this was easier." "What part?" "The distance." His honesty hurt because I felt it too. Now that we'd crossed this line, now that I knew what it felt like to hold him and kiss him and wake up beside him, the idea of going back to screens suddenly felt unbearable. Greg studied my face for another second before speaking again. "I think I'm in trouble with you." I smiled faintly. "Just now realizing that?" "No," he murmured. "I realized it months ago." That hit hard enough to leave me speechless. He looked nervous after admitting it too, which somehow made it even more meaningful. I reached over, brushing my fingers lightly through his hair. "Good," I said quietly. "Because I'm pretty gone for you too." Greg stared at me for a second like those words physically affected him. Then he kissed me again. Slow and deep and emotional enough that my chest actually hurt afterward. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine and closed his eyes briefly. And in that moment, sitting there tangled together in the quiet glow of my apartment, after spending nearly a year falling for each other from a distance, I realized something terrifying. Meeting Greg hadn't made my feelings smaller. It had made everything infinitely worse. Because now I knew exactly what I'd be missing once he got on that plane home. The last full day Greg was in town felt strangely heavy from the moment we woke up. Not bad. Just fragile. Like both of us were silently aware a countdown had started. We tried pretending otherwise. We got breakfast at this tiny diner near my apartment where Greg made fun of my coffee order again. "You basically drink melted ice cream. It makes me happy. You're emotionally attached to whipped cream. You flew across the country for me, Greg. Let's not discuss poor decisions." He laughed so hard the waitress smiled at us from across the room. And for a while, things felt normal again. Easy. But every now and then I'd catch him looking at me differently. Longer. Like he was trying to memorize things. The way I smiled. The sound of my laugh. How I reached across the table without thinking when I talked. And honestly, I was doing the exact same thing. That afternoon we ended up back at my apartment because neither of us really wanted to go anywhere else. Rain started sometime after 3, soft against the windows while we sat on the couch together in comfortable silence. Greg had one arm around me while scrolling absently through something on his phone. I was half lying against his chest listening to his heartbeat. And suddenly the thought hit me again. Tomorrow he leaves. My chest tightened immediately. Greg must have noticed the shift in me because he looked down. What happened? I hesitated. Then quietly admitted it. I hate that this is almost over. The honesty hung between us. Greg locked his phone and set it aside without another word. Then both his arms wrapped around me fully, pulling me tighter against him. Hey, he murmured softly. I buried my face briefly against his shoulder, embarrassed by how emotional I suddenly felt. This was a bad idea, I muttered. Greg frowned slightly. Meeting me? No, I said quietly. Now I know exactly what I'm missing. Something in his expression changed at that. Softer. Almost wrecked looking. His hand slid slowly through my hair while rain tapped gently against the windows behind us. You know what scares me? He admitted after a minute. What? That this already feels too important. My chest hurt hearing that because I understood perfectly. Long-distance feelings had always existed in this weird protected space. But now I knew how his hugs felt. How warm his hands were. What his voice sounded like right beside my ear instead of through headphones. There was no going back after that. Greg tilted my chin up carefully until I looked at him. We'll figure it out, he said quietly. You sound more confident than I feel. That's because if I let myself panic, I'm probably never getting on that plane tomorrow. I laughed weakly at that. But part of me wondered if he meant it. The room stayed quiet for a second afterward. Then Greg looked at me with that same intense expression he'd had at the airport. I need you to know something, he said softly. My pulse immediately sped up. What? I'm not disappearing after this. The seriousness in his voice hit me instantly. Greg wasn't making empty promises. That's what made him different. He only said things he truly meant. I know, I whispered. No, he said gently. I mean it. His thumb brushed slowly along my jaw. This wasn't just some exciting trip for me, Bradley. Emotion climbed into my throat so fast it caught me off guard. Because deep down, I think part of me had still been afraid this would fade once real life returned. That eventually the distance would become too hard. But looking at Greg now, I realized he was just as deep in this as I was. Maybe deeper. He kissed me softly then. Slow. Emotional. Not rushed or heated this time. Just honest. And somehow that almost hurt worse. When we pulled apart, neither of us moved very far away. Greg rested his forehead lightly against mine while his arms stayed around my waist. I wish you lived closer, he murmured. Me too. Another quiet pause. Then suddenly Greg smiled faintly. What? You know what's insane? What? A year ago you were just some sarcastic guy arguing with strangers online. I laughed softly. You started it. And now I'm sitting here wondering how I'm supposed to leave you tomorrow. That sentence hit me right in the chest. I looked away briefly because suddenly my eyes were burning a little. Greg noticed immediately. Hey, he said softly. I'm fine. You're emotional. You're emotional. That's true. That made me laugh despite myself. Greg smiled too, then leaned back slightly to study my face again. And there it was. That look. The one that always made me feel like he was seeing every version of me at once. Not just the polished parts. Everything. I'm really glad you answered that comment, he said quietly. I smiled. Yeah? Best thing that's happened to me in years. And honestly? Same. That night neither of us slept much. We stayed awake talking quietly in bed while rain continued outside. About stupid things. Serious things. Future things we were almost afraid to say out loud. Visits. Flights. Possibly living in the same city someday. None of it felt impossible anymore. Hard? Absolutely. But not impossible. Sometime around 2 in the morning, Greg pulled me closer against his chest and kissed the top of my head softly. "You know what I realized?" he murmured sleepily. "What?" "I think I fell for you long before we ever met." My throat tightened instantly. I tilted my head up enough to look at him in the dark. And for the first time since this whole thing started nearly a year ago, either of us looked away from what this really was anymore. Not flirting. Not fantasy. Not just chemistry. Love. Real, terrifying, long-distance love. And lying there in Greg's arms while the rain fell outside, I realized something else too. Meeting him in real life hadn't ruined the fantasy. It had given me something infinitely more dangerous. A future I suddenly wanted more than anything. The airport goodbye was worse than I expected. Way worse. Neither of us talked much during the drive there that morning. Not because things felt awkward, almost the opposite. Everything felt too real now. Greg kept one hand resting on my thigh most of the drive, thumb moving absent-mindedly against my jeans while soft music played through the speakers. Every few minutes I'd glance over at him and feel that same ache all over again. Because this man had somehow become essential to me in 4 days. And now I had to watch him leave. When we parked, either of us rushed to get out of the car. Greg leaned back in the passenger seat with a quiet sigh. "I hate airports now," he muttered. I laughed weakly. "That happened fast." "Yeah." Silence settled again. Heavy this time. Then Greg turned toward me fully. "Come here." I'd barely had time to react before he pulled me across the center console into a kiss. Slow. Warm. Painfully affectionate. The kind of kiss that says everything neither person wants to say out loud yet. My hand slid into his hair automatically while his fingers tightened gently at my waist. And for a second I actually forgot he was leaving. Then he pulled back slowly, forehead resting against mine. "You okay?" he asked softly. "No." His expression tightened slightly at the honesty. "Yeah," he admitted quietly. "Me either." The walk through the airport felt surreal. This time we weren't strangers nervously looking for each other anymore. Now we moved naturally together. Close enough that our shoulders kept brushing. Like a real couple. And honestly, I think we both noticed that. At security, everything suddenly became painfully final. Greg set his bag down beside him before turning toward me. Neither of us spoke immediately. There were people everywhere around us, announcements echoing overhead, rolling suitcases passing constantly, but somehow it still felt like we were standing alone. Greg looked exhausted emotionally. So did I. "I don't want to do this part," I admitted quietly. His eyes softened instantly. "I know." Then he stepped closer and wrapped his arms around me tightly. Not a quick, polite hug. A real one. The kind where you hold on slightly longer than necessary because you're already missing the person before they're gone. I buried my face briefly against his shoulder, breathing him in one last time. And God, that almost broke me. Greg pulled back just enough to look at me. "You call me the second you get home," he said. I laughed quietly. "You mean after your flight?" "No," he murmured. "I mean after I somehow survive leaving you." My chest physically hurt hearing that. I reached up, touching his jaw gently. "This isn't the end, okay?" Greg nodded immediately. "Not even close." And the certainty in his voice calmed something in me instantly. Because I believed him. Then he kissed me one last time. Soft. Brief. Just enough to make leaving 10 times harder. When he finally stepped back, either of us moved for a second. Greg smiled sadly. "There's my guy." That sentence absolutely destroyed me. Before I could respond properly, they called his boarding group. And suddenly this was happening whether we liked it or not. Greg grabbed his backpack slowly, eyes still locked on mine. "I'll see you soon," he said quietly. Not hopefully. Not maybe. Soon. I nodded because my throat wasn't working correctly anymore. Then he turned and walked toward security. Halfway through the line he looked back at me one more time. And smiled. That same nervous, relieved smile from the first moment we saw each other at arrivals. Only now it meant something completely different. I watched until he disappeared from sight. Then I stood there in the middle of the airport feeling strangely empty. The drive home was rough. My apartment felt even worse. Everything still smelled faintly like him. His coffee cup sat beside the sink. His hoodie had left lint on my couch. One of his hair ties was still sitting near my bathroom counter. Tiny things, but every single one hit me hard. I ended up lying in bed staring at the ceiling for almost an hour before my phone buzzed. Greg. Boarding. Then another message immediately after. Miss you already? I smiled so hard it actually hurt. You literally just left. Doesn't matter. I stared at that message for a long time. Then finally typed the truth. Love you? My heart nearly exploded hitting send. 3 dots appeared instantly. Then, been waiting for you to say it first. I laughed out loud alone in my apartment like an idiot. Another message came seconds later. Love you too, Bradley. And somehow, despite the distance and the ache and how impossible this whole thing probably looked from the outside, I suddenly felt okay again. Because a year ago Greg had been a random stranger on the internet. Now he was the first person I wanted to tell everything to. The person I missed before planes even took off. The person who made every future version of my life suddenly look better just by existing in it. People online always say long-distance relationships aren't real. That you can't truly know someone through a screen. Maybe sometimes that's true. But sometimes the right person starts feeling real long before you touch them. And sometimes you meet them in an airport after a year of messages and late-night calls, only to realize they already feel like home.